Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very, very excited to have you. My name is TJ. I'm the Director of Partnerships at the Elections Group. For anybody who is joining us for the first time, the Elections Group is a nonpartisan election administration consulting firm. We partner with state and local election officials to implement new programs and improve processes for voters and other stakeholders. The Elections Group is a team of election experts who support election professionals through collaboration, thought leadership, and elevating best practices. Those of us at the Elections Group have all worked in local elections offices or state election offices, so we know firsthand the challenges faced by election officials, and we use our real-world experience to help folks solve challenges. I'm really excited to have an awesome group here today for our conversation on innovations in poll worker management, specifically as it relates to retention and recruitment. With us, we have Lynn Handy, who is the founder of the Talent Partners Project and a senior fellow at the University of Maryland's Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement. Anybody who knows me personally knows that I may have an issue with the University of Maryland today. This evening, the University of Florida and the University of Maryland play basketball in the Sweet 16. So we'll be rooting for the Gators at my house, but perhaps rooting for Maryland at Lynn's house. And as we learned in our little warm-up time, Lori Fiegel, who is from the St. Louis County Election Board, she's the strategy and innovation advisor. She's also a University of Maryland, I believe you said alum. So I'm outnumbered today, but at least we have Mark with us. Mark Pacheco is the director of elections for the city of Taunton, Massachusetts. I am actually going to jump to other folks. We'll start with Lynn just for a little bit more of an introduction, and then we'll go to Lori and Mark, and then we'll get started on the questions.
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Lynn Handy. I just kind of repeating, I'm a founder of the Talent Partners Project, which is really focused on supporting talent initiatives across every level of election. So everyone on this call, you are the talent, all the way up to every role from a poll worker to a temp worker to an election official. So it's a pleasure to see everyone and meet everyone today.
Lori?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. It is great to be here. So St. Louis County is a big jurisdiction. We're a population of about 1 million people, 750,000 registered voters. We talk about recruitment and retention of poll workers all the time. I've got some of my colleagues in the room with me who are the real experts. I'm just the kind of the messenger today, but I am excited to talk about some of the innovative things that we've been doing. So thank you.
Absolutely. Mark?
Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for being here. Unlike Lori, who does county, here in Mass, we do elections specific to the city or town. So Taunton has 44,000 voters, which is divided into 8 wards. We have 16 precincts and 2 sub-precincts. We have 5 dedicated staff that administers elections for the city of Taunton, and their main goal is to not only administer elections, but voter list maintenance. We also have a staff of about 150 election workers who help support our elections.
That's awesome. Before we jump to the questions, we did something a little bit new this time, which is we reached out to folks who have attended previous webinars, and we got some of the cool things that you're doing in your offices. So I'm going to run through some of those, or all of the ones that I received. These all have been paraphrased. I think I got some submissions that were 30 words. I got some submissions that were 400 words, but I had to pare them down a little bit. So we'll work quickly through these. Alina in California has a student poll worker program, which her office revamped in 2024 with an info packet and strong school outreach. She says over 200 students volunteered, and they gave certificates and pins, which helped retain young voters. I think that's some of what Lynn is going to talk about today. Scott from Nevada, not Nevada, Nevada, mentions his intentional recruitment strategies. recruited from across the political spectrum to build trust and reduce tensions. I think that may be the opposite approach that some other folks may take in wanting to not lean in on that, but Scott did. I think that's an excellent idea, and it worked in his jurisdiction. He says that attending community meetings as the public information officer helped. 25% of his workforce last election were first-time poll workers, so there was more training needed, but it was worthwhile. Quarterly newsletters and thank yous. So Jesse in Illinois says they sent out light, informative quarterly newsletters to help build relationships. They did thank you events every other year to reinforce appreciation without always just asking for help. Poll worker management tools, so some of that tech. This is from Samantha in Arizona. They use a poll worker management tool for communication, and then they focus on gratitude and listening to poll worker feedback to make sure that they feel valued. Making working the polls easier. This is from Pam in Pennsylvania. I know this is one of the points that we're going to really talk about today, which is doing the fundamentals well. So improving your poll worker training materials, using hands-on training, making sure folks get paid faster, having better forms, and being constantly responsive. Use feedback to make changes and advocate for poll workers. Monthly newsletters. This is from Pamela and Renee in Georgia. Monthly newsletters with short training refreshers or updates, keeping it at the front of their mind, even during non-election times, and then also doing a poll worker appreciation day. April in Alaska says that they have a Civic Superstars program, or they call their poll workers Civic Superstars during training to highlight their importance. They do annual recognition by years of service, plus giving out pens during training. A local newspaper, this is really cool. A local newspaper highlights one election worker each year and celebrates their contributions. Recognition and promotion from Paul in Georgia. So looking back at 2024, they too revamped part of their program with an info packet and strong school outreach. They had more than 200 students who volunteered. And again, those certificates and pins helped the retention of younger students. Appreciation events and recruiting. Carol in Florida says that they host poll worker appreciation events with awards and pins. The pins, those are a really big thing. I know that there's a service provider that does those. We're happy to send some examples at the end of this. They recruit at schools, colleges, and businesses with great service. I love that last piece, going to places where you know you get good service, recognize that elections need great people who provide great service. So awesome, Carol. And then they provide t-shirts to help build team spirit. Krista in Colorado, I've noticed there's been Pam in Pennsylvania, Krista in Colorado. This was not on purpose. They send quarterly newsletters with hiring updates, and they're implementing a computer skills screening for applicants to better assess fit. So making sure you're putting folks in roles that make sense for them. Mary in California, they do quarterly newsletters to keep poll workers engaged, and they've actually increased they've increased poll worker stipends, and they provide an end-of-year bonus to those who work both elections. So those are the submissions that we got. I do greatly appreciate anybody who contributed to those. I am going to turn it first. I'm going to look at Lori because she's St. Louis County, excellent election office. I know a lot of folks across the country know the work that you guys do, look to you all as an example for much of it. So Lori, can you just start with an overview of some of the practices and strategies that you use at the St. Louis County Election Board?
Yeah, I would love to do that. So again, we're a large jurisdiction. We have a pool of about 3,600 election workers. We call them election judges here, but I'm really talking about poll workers. Missouri is also a state that requires parity at the polls by major party. So we are a county that has about a 60-40 split of Democrats and Republicans. So we are always challenged to have that parity and do recruitment. We do a lot of the things that you just showed. We do newsletters, we've done open houses, we do certificates for numbers of elections work, so all of those kind of things. some of the innovative things that we've done, and I can, backtrack later and talk about them in more detail, is we've done focus groups with our election judges to talk to them about, why do you do this? What makes you come back every year and work another election? How can we support you better? What are your challenges? What would you like to see from us? And we've learned some things, like our recruitment messaging could be a lot more diverse and varied than just civic duty, kinds of things. We've done magnet mailer that would prove to be very popular, where you put it on your fridge and it's all the key election dates, but also here's a QR code to find out how to sign up to be a poll worker. We do a lot of talk radio because that's a way to reach an audience for us. And then we did a deep dive into our data. So I'll take a minute to talk about that, and then we can move on. But we were fortunate to have 2 great college students over the summer for interns. And one of the projects we had them do was to look at all of our poll worker data. So we use an election management worker system. So we have some basic demographic data. We know how many elections folks worked, where they live, where they get assigned. And we did a deep dive into that data, mostly kind of by party. So is there an age difference between the parties? Is there, where do people live? Where are they concentrated? To help us learn how to better recruit and strategize and kind of meet the needs for that bipartisan parity. And we learned that we actually have a similar number of both parties, but the placement, the ability or willingness for folks to go to another part of the county, we're about 560 square miles, is difficult. And so our election judge team came up with the idea of having traveling judges as a recruitment tool. They get an additional stipend to work. They are literally, recruited. Would you like to be a traveling judge? We instituted that last year. It seems to be working, and that is one way that we, dove into some data, came up with a strategy, and implemented it, and we'll be monitoring if there's a way to improve that.
That's awesome. That's excellent. I'm going to look to Lynn now. And Lynn, we actually had you on a webinar last year talking a little bit about some of this. And one of the things I really appreciate about your work and how you talk about your work is really the intentionality that you bring, or that you encourage in others, especially as it relates to recruitment. And I think that certainly lends itself well to retention. Can you just talk generally about how important that is?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, wow, all the innovation that's happening across the country, really exciting to see. You guys are all doing, a lot of things that we really recommend. And what we recommend is really an applicant-centric, like a poll worker-centric approach. So how are you best serving that person who comes in, and you're thinking about as soon as they apply that first time, how are you engaging with them? How are you supporting them? How are you acknowledging their efforts? So I think that's really what we try to push when we have conversations with partners. And that it can really start at a micro level. So you can really do something as simple as like putting your application online if it's not yet online, or something that eases the application process for that poll worker. But I really, I think Lori's work is really speaks to that kind of level of innovation, and I love the data dive, really identifying this, like you got to a root cause, like, hey, people don't want to travel. Like you need to rethink this a little bit, and coming up with a really great solution. So that's just one example, but really, how do you put that poll worker at the center of your recruitment and retention efforts?
That's excellent. All right, we're gonna come to you, Mark. One of the things that I was really impressed by was I know you did a debrief after the 2024 general election, and you included 2 of your, I think they're called wardens, election wardens in Massachusetts. So your chief poll workers at your polling places. Can you talk about what led you to do that, and what are some of the benefits with getting that feedback at that level?
Absolutely. That we did do a debrief just to kind of learn as much as we possibly could from the federal election cycle. I found that, as on the election administrator side, we roll out certain ideas that we have and certain procedures, but we only see kind of the tip of the iceberg. When we go to the polling locations or when we hear feedback from our voters, we just see just such a small amount. It's really our frontline election workers who are dealing with what we've implemented. So they're best to tell us what they experienced. And I also feel for almost everything we do in our office, I really like to include our election wardens and clerks in almost everything, because I feel they really don't have any sort of loyalty to me. They more have a loyalty to elections or the city of Taunton, or maybe just the oath that they took. And they're the ones that are going to go out in the community and say, this is what the elections office is doing. They're taking our feedback. They made me a part of the process. So, and I also think maybe what caused them to sign up to be an election worker, it could be because it's their home community, they're interested in elections or civics, but it might be because they heard things on the news or they weren't totally sure about, are we administering elections fairly and freely and securely? So they're our best line of defense. So when we include them on the debrief, they're going to go out and tell everyone exactly what we're doing. And that way they're not hearing it from me. They're actually hearing it from a friend or a neighbor. And on the other side of it, with the debrief, I'm so excited to tell them this spring when we have our next election that we actually took your feedback and we're implementing it. Almost everything that our election workers brought to us, we're doing or we've already done. So as far as engagement goes and being a good place to work, their input, not only was it valued, we did something with it. And we're not afraid to change it again. This will be the practice going forward, is doing debriefs. So if it doesn't work or things could be better, we're always going to be an office that is changing our procedures to best fit our voters first and then our election workers.
I love that commitment to continuous improvement, and I think that's so important within any election office, because no election, as those of us who have run elections know, no two elections are the same. I want to go back to the idea of feedback, mostly as it relates to retention, but I think, Lynn, you might be able to give us something on the recruitment end. Can anybody talk about the value of using feedback, of taking feedback, using it to change procedures, using it to review things, and what that means to the folks who are giving it, and how they may be more willing to continue when they know that you're paying attention? Happy to go to Lori, Mark, or Lynn on this one.
I'm good to jump in first. So I think one of the benefits for us in doing, we do regular surveys after every election, because we use a worker management portal. It goes to everybody. And so we get lots of feedback, and we use that feedback to look at issues that consistently come up election to election or seems to be a trend. And then in the focus groups, we were able to really do a deep dive and ask more specifically, what is the most challenging for you? And they were like closing the polls, which is a really hard, important thing at the end of a very long day. So what can we do to make that better? And then the experienced poll workers actually brought us examples of, well, I do a little, a worksheet for assignments. I use this little flow chart that I created. Well, we kind of collected all of those, and then we converted that into a couple different options, a kind of a flow chart of closing versus a checklist. You can use whatever works for you. So we were able to put some specifics into practice. And then our new our new, what we call our election judge managers, they're election judges who kind of got promoted, based on their experience. They really wanted to learn from experienced judges. And so we got some great ideas on how experienced judges like to huddle with their team at the beginning of the day before polls open, make assignments, and just do some different practical things like that. So we were able to kind of codify that into some practical, game day changes for them.
I love the idea of giving folks kind of what works for them, whether it's a checklist or a flow chart, and letting them choose their own adventure. Obviously having the correct information, but not being so rigid that they have to follow one single binder. That's really cool. And I hadn't heard of that idea. So that's awesome. Mark or Lynn, anything to add there? Go ahead, Mark.
We had similar feedback from our election workers, and that's something we've recently started doing as well, as doing getting feedback from our election workers as far as forms go and the debrief. And one of the things we learned is our election materials is just so wordy, and it's all in all different forms. So we've revamped our election materials as well to be simple checklists. So when you're working a 15-hour day and a lot of election workers are overstimulated and overworked, they can go to a very simple, easy to understand checklist. We'll still give them all those very wordy training materials as well, but we're trying to make it easier for them. And another part of your point, TJ, about getting feedback from election workers, I still think a lot of election workers come aboard because of word of mouth. If they're talking to neighbors or friends, or I want the narrative to be, Taunton is a very nice place to work. They listen to your feedback. It's a good team there. That's just kind of more the old school. I think a lot of them do come because it's a nice place to work. So if we're listening to them and taking their feedback, even if we consider it and tell them why or why not it doesn't work, I think it's great to have someone ask you, what do you think, or what could be better, and then discuss it, versus that top-down approach all the time. We're all working elections because we're part of something bigger than us. And that's just another way to engage everybody, I guess, is asking them, what do you think?
I see Lynn smiling, and I think that this is an excellent segue into some of the work she does. So Lynn, can you remark on some of what Mark is talking about?
Just overall, it's amazing to hear this kind of reframing and this like feedback loop. And I think it's really incredible because, number one, I think when I hear kind of what St. Louis and how they're approaching it, really empowering poll workers to like be part of the solution and like communicating to one another, that really just is incredibly smart and really important in that retention rate. Because some of your poll workers have been here and they have developed these things. So empowering them to take that and share that with their poll workers is really great. And Mark, your example is perfect. Like, you just listened and you gave them feedback right back. And I think that's the biggest thing, is closing the loop. Like, hey, we heard you. And here's a reason why we might not be able to move forward with this, but we move forward with these things. And that open transparency and communication is just, everybody wants that. They want that in every role that they have. And so it's super great to hear that this is, kind of happening across. And when I'm looking at the Q&A, people are they're saying, yeah, like we do that too. And there's a lot of encouragement of building these steps into their poll working process.
Lynn, I really like the point that you made, that these are things people want in any position that they have. And I think it's easy for election administrators to look at your election workforce, or much of your election workforce, specifically the folks who work for you a single or 2 single days a year, and think, well, I don't necessarily need to do the same, care work, right? But I would say that is a wrong approach, and it's just as important regardless of how much time folks are spending with you. Though for your full-time staff, you obviously may need to do much more of that care work, or maybe in some examples you don't, but I can let folks ponder that on their own.
Yeah, and I'll second what Mark said, because he's right. Like, they're your champions. So yeah, maybe they're only working directly for you for 2 days, but they've gained so much knowledge and they're sharing it back to their experience, to their neighbors. And again, saying, hey, no, it was really fun, or I really learned it, or this is actually how they process votes, like just really having that open engagement with their community members. And that's super important.
I see in the Q&A somebody talking about having quick guides. So I know we had the Center for Civic Design on the first part of this webinar a month ago or so, and they talked about Bite Snack Meal and using that concept to create your poll worker guides. So bite, the little bit of information, snack a little bit more, meal being kind of everything that you would ever need to know. So I like that refrain kind of keeps coming up, that, both for training, but also for recruitment and retention, it's really important that you kind of hold on to those ideas and see them through each part of your operation. I'm going to turn a little bit to recruitment. Lori, we spoke earlier this week about how excellent your data-driven approach to recruitment is. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and how, as a large jurisdiction, how important it is to use that data to drive the work that you're doing?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So I'll start with that notion of the big funnel, where you have to go after lots of folks, get their attention to recruit, and then, refine from there. So, one innovation, well, I think it was the innovation that we had was, gee, what is a cost-effective way to reach a lot of households in St. Louis County? And we have, over 400,000 of them. We partnered with our director of Department of Revenue, who sends out a tax notice to anybody in St. Louis County who owns a car or a boat. That's a lot of people. And we put a recruitment flyer in that, and we got thousands of responses. Thousands. You got to be careful what you wish for because it was a lot, but it helped us replenish. We have, like I said, almost 4,000 workers in our pool, so it helped us replenish that. I guess we were doing that prior to the 2020, presidential. So that was sort of the really big picture. And then because we have the data and we know where our shortfalls are, we know that we can't just do global, be a poll worker. We have to find different strategies. And for us, it's really the bipartisan parity is our biggest issue. And so, we've done some selective, customized, like I said, talk, radio and presentations and targeted mailings and things like that to do it. We also dispelled some myths we had by looking at data about what we thought to be true or not true. And so looking at, age differences, or we found out that we have twice as many Democratic women working the polls than men. Well, why is that? Or should we, do it? Is there messaging that we need to, consider there? So I think sometimes you have a narrative in your agency that you think, well, this is what our issue is, but by looking at the data, you can potentially dispel that. The other thing I want to mention, just on a real practical level, is that I was a planner in my former life, a strategic planner. And one thing I like to do is I like to look at all the jurisdictions in the country that are like us. So similar size, maybe demographics. And then I like to look at jurisdictions who are inspirational or aspirational. And so we keep a list of about 20 other jurisdictions in the county that we're always looking at, well, how are they doing it? What are they thinking? And I think any jurisdiction, regardless of your size, can do that and just regularly look at what are some best practices that are happening. And obviously participating in webinars like the election group hosts.
That's awesome. I one of the things that I took out of what you just said was that folks' motivations for working the polls may be different. I know that there's tons of research on how to, not tons of research, but I've seen research on, the civic pride message, as you mentioned, Lori, may be less effective for one group than it is for another group. The, hey, you can come make $200. That may be a very effective message for young people and less effective for others. looking at you, Lori, but also looking at Lynn, how can you intentionally use, I think, your communication methods to have multiple messages kind of going out at the same time? What does that look like?
I'll let Lori take that one.
I'll jump in first, only that this is more qualitative than quantitative, but because that's how you use focus groups. But by using focus groups, personally, I was quite surprised. We had about 25 participants, and I will tell you, we had 25 nuanced responses around why people do what they do and why they come back and work at the polls. And it was heartwarming, touching. It was everything from to see my neighbors. I've served in the military. This is how I can serve some more. It was about, sometimes it was about pay. Sometimes it was about building a resume. It was really quite varied, and really lends itself to marketing to different, I think, groups, different kinds of messaging, depending on, again, we're always looking for younger people for some succession planning. So what you could test those messages. I mean, we're a bigger jurisdiction, so we do digital ads and look at strategy around what's working and what working. But I mean, just again, like Mark and Taunton, just talking to people and starting to hear those nuances, I think is important. And it was extremely powerful, I think, as well. Very personal.
Lynn, anything to add?
Yeah, I think in developing, so kind of my background is kind of like in thinking holistically about job ads and how you can attract people. And I think one of the biggest things when you're developing these job ads is to be as transparent as possible about the entire process for that applicant, and to be inviting. Like, we want you to join us. And also, here's the process. Like, here's how much, you can expect to make, here's the expectations. So that way you're kind of clearly messaging and being fully transparent about the whole process will lead to more applicants who are going to kind of come through and apply. And I think that that's really the important part. So looking at your ad, is it super clear? Is it inviting? So a lot is like, we need, is it inviting to them? Do they feel like they are being invited into your election process? I think is really important. And everyone's kind of drive for wanting to do that is going to be different, but having that invitation of like, we want you to join our team, that kind of energy, I think is a really great way to open the door.
Can we talk a little bit about the benefits of keeping in touch with your poll workers, election workers, wardens, whatever word you use in your jurisdiction, keeping in touch with them during non-election times? I think back to my time, we would send birthday cards. And of course we would send birthday cards because we appreciated folks and wanted them to know that we were thinking about them. But another, secondary benefit was we would often get birthday cards back because the person had moved, or we would get a phone call from the person saying, hey, I got your birthday card after it was forwarded to my new address in Maryland, and I'm no longer going to be a poll worker for you. Hopefully they did it in Maryland. But can we talk a little bit about some of those primary and secondary benefits? Go to Mark first, because I know you keep in touch with your folks, Mark.
Thank you. We do a end of year card, and it's just a little postcard, and it says thank you for your hard work in supporting us. And Lori's pretty amazing with all her data. So Lori, you're gonna appreciate this. We always do how many elections we had, how many ballots were cast, and the type, so they can see kind of what their impact was on the city, and thank them. We also at the end of the federal election cycle, we called individually all of our wardens and clerks and thank them for their hard work. Just took the time to talk to them all, and I know that went a very long way with all of our election workers, and just that personal touch, it was nice.
That's excellent. Lori, Lynn, anything to add there?
I'll jump in. So we have our election management system. So we have a portal. So it's pretty easy for us to do blasts and email updates and, that kind of thing. So that's certainly part of it. We do a monthly, newsletter. We do certificates for milestone, elections, those kind of things. We have a lot of opportunities for different kinds of election work. So we do ballot opening, we do some early voting. So we have lots of different ways that maybe folks have been doing one thing, they can come and do another. In 2024, after 2023 being a relatively quieter year, we felt like we needed to energize and re-engage with our election workers. And so we did a big fun open house. We had 400 people come. We did demos. We did swag. We had photo ops under the red, white, and blue, arch. So lots of fun things to get them, excited and engaged in that way. Just, kind of get them warmed up for the big year. We also did a series of videos for the first time. I know it's common in agencies to do videos, and we recruited our poll workers to do testimonials, to be extras, to recreate, the polling place and be on film. And then we have a pretty active Facebook following among our poll workers and a pretty active social media activity in general. So we're always looking to, post and highlight some of the great work that they're doing.
Lynn, any thoughts?
No, I think everybody, I'm just looking at some other suggestions in the chat, which I really liked. Ms. Hall said they do a virtual monthly lunch and learn of different topics, but they actually open that up to a larger community of people. But I think that's great. Poll workers, party reps, and the general public too, to just kind of, again, open the door. That's also a recruitment tool, right? Because people could register for that lunch and learn and become connected. But yeah, everyone on this chat shared some really great stuff too, and also interest in learning more about your newsletters, Lori, and what they look like and how they can potentially add that into their operations. So yeah, I think just exactly that. And actually one other comment that someone made that I really loved was like getting it out of transactional, like making the relationship more than just one way. Like this is not transactional, this is ongoing. This is, a relationship you want to keep going for a long time.
Lori, there's in the Q&A, which I encourage folks to use. Please use the Q&A. I see a couple technical questions, so we'll get to those quickly, which is number one, how much extra do you pay the traveling election judges? Do those folks stay at the same place all day so that the chain of custody format works, or maybe Missouri has different considerations? And then finally, are the traveling election judges, are they willing to go anywhere? So kind of three questions in one. Happy to back up and ask them one by one. I'm sorry. That's to you, Lori.
Yes, and I was momentarily distracted trying to get some of the facts. So the traveling judges, they travel, but they're not roving. They are assigned to a polling location for the day. They get paid 50 extra on top of, we pay, I think, about a $200, base pay. They get paid for training as well. And then they get this extra stipend of 50 as well. And then what was your other question?
I think you got all of them. You did. Whether they go anywhere, how much extra they get paid, and then if they stay in one place. So yes. You did them all. You did them all. Very good. Let's see. I'm going to shift a little bit to the Q&A because we do have a bunch of questions coming in through now. I think here's one. This is more of a tech question. What's the best way to distribute newsletters to ensure that people receive it and actually read it? Is it mail, email, or a URL on a website? Anybody's welcome to jump. Go ahead, Lynn.
I'm comfortable answering this probably not going to be excited about it. You're really going to have to kind of collect data. So I think you kind of have to be diverse about your settings and see where people are engaging. So if you're able to have that click rate on your email blast, you can see how many people are engaging. So anything that allows you to track, I think, is the most important part. So if you set an URL up on your website, if there's a way to track the clicks and see how many people are engaging, then you're able to see the impact. But I wouldn't say there's, I think for every one community, there's probably multiple different ways that people are going to engage with your information. So just starting there, tracking and seeing where the engagement is at the highest.
And I think Lori offered to share some of their stuff. So maybe Lori, if it's okay with you, we can include some newsletter examples. Otherwise, we're happy to find some other ones. So we'll make sure to send that out with the thank you email. Go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, I was just going to say, everything that I've really talked about, I have a documentation, an example, a template, a flyer. So yes, I'd totally be, would be happy to share our data analysis, how we do some of these things. So we'll get them to you so that you can get them to the bigger audience.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. This is a question for everybody, but many of these tools or many of these practices, whether it's a piece of software, it's hosting some type of event yearly or monthly or however, whatever cadence you do them, how do you convince leadership that these tools are beneficial and they improve and expand the election worker pool? So looking at Mark, looking at Lynn, looking at Lori, what's the sell as it relates to making sure that people who are making funding decisions are supportive of these things? That one's not from me, it's from the chat. So
I can take the first one. I mean, I think you need to know your leadership and what motivates them. And I think when you're talking about recruitment and retention and effective strategies, there's multiple ways that you can really kind of sell it to that leadership. If they're looking for understanding of like, how does this reduce costs? Like there's a lot of data out there that says the value of retention versus bringing on and onboarding someone brand new. Like just just kind of laying out like the retention of our poll workers equates to X savings across the board, from training to concerns about hiccups on election day. That retention is super important. It also can lead, but again, it's kind of who your leader is and how they're what they're motivated by. But I do think if it's looking at that cost value, like that retention rate can easily be connected to kind of savings on the long run and higher performing on election day.
Mark or Lori, go ahead, Mark.
I think just with any kind of big sell I have, I always try to take the mindset of don't take it from me. So I will try to find somewhere else where it worked well, or use other examples that they can get behind. So if, we have an election commission here in Taunton, I'm sure everyone has different setups, but if I can run something by them and get another board, to back me up on it, or just another community, it's just the more folks that can say, yes, we agree with this idea. I think when you bring it to whoever the decision maker is, it shows it wasn't a hasty decision. It's well thought out, and there's whether it's people in the community or there's some figureheads that also agree with you on it. So that's my approach with most bigger decisions.
Lori?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So it really hasn't been an issue for us. We have a very supportive leadership. I will say that we talk a lot about the spotlight on election agencies, particularly since 2020. And there's just kind of a universal, I think, belief that we want our elections, to work. And so people appreciate and understand that we need poll workers to get the job done. And in St. Louis County, we're a little bit different. Mark, I can't remember how many precincts that you said you had, but we have just about 1,000 precincts in St. Louis County. And we have one of the highest per capita of elected officials of any jurisdiction in the country. And so elected officials really care about having well-run, folks at the polls. So we also do a lot of planning as well. So we don't just come up with this and expect to do it on a whim. We spend some time during our budget process thinking about the election cycle, knowing that midterms are next year. So we're going to do a sticker contest. Well, we plan for it. So the same thing with our recruitment strategies. Most things are, we've got them on the radar. We've got some cost benefit about it. So we've been pretty fortunate in having good support in the things that we've been able to do. And then we're always cost conscious. So looking for that partner. Well, what's something that somebody is already mailing to everybody? And it's just the cost of the printing for us. So that was a win-win situation.
That's excellent. We've talked a lot about tech. We've talked a little bit about tech. Mark and Lori, knowing that some of this tech is new, some of the software that you use is relatively new to your operations, has it positively affected recruiting folks? Has it become easier to get people, or is it the same story? Is it harder? Mark, if you're talking, you're muted.
Oh, I'll go. I would say I'm probably in a different boat than Lori is. So we definitely had a shortage when I first came aboard this community, and we took more of like a grassroots approach to recruiting. But I've already talked about word of mouth, but we kind of looked at, we looked at grocery stores. We put up flyers. We did it at our senior center. We did it in restaurant menus. Even like the tablecloths that they put down at restaurants, we advertised on. And then social media, which is, the technology part. We did, Facebook, LinkedIn, our website. So I think so. Our approach was more grassroots, and we have had a lot of luck with that. We've had a waiting list. I think folks probably sit on our waiting list for 6 months or so before they get a call from us now. So we have a nice backlog of folks waiting to work for us. So as far as technology goes, it hasn't impacted us too much here in Taunton.
Okay, well, I think it was an interesting question because I kind of thought about it in two respects. Because on the one hand, the nature of how we administer our elections has become much more technical, and that has changed how we have to recruit. So we now use, routinely, we've done away with paper, and we now do closing certification and opening certifications and line tracker all on an iPhone. So our election workers have to be trained in using all kinds of technology. So in some regards, that is a different challenge, and you have to think about your recruitment and your recruitment strategies. So that has changed. On the other hand, having a lot of technology to reach out to people, to gather data about what works, to analyze social media, those kind of things, is helpful. I think in a jurisdiction like ours, we've probably tried everything, every kind of thing you can think of. However, in a county of 1 million people, you have to be strategic. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that bang for the buck, the targeted, audiences that we're looking for. And not to say that word of mouth, yes, absolutely, relational folks who, half of their family ends up getting involved because of that. Those things absolutely happen. We're talking about people. But in terms of our strategies and tactics, we really have to think about, what's going to be most effective in doing those kinds of things. And we talk about it all the time. Should we approach businesses in certain parts of the county and have them help recruit? What kind of speaking circuit is that going to get us the numbers that we need Talk radio has been a big one for us to recruit. It works in our community, and it works, for some of the partisan kind of recruitment that we have to do. So it really depends on your jurisdiction. But technology, it's definitely a double-edged situation for us.
Absolutely. Lynn, anything to add there before we go to the next Q&A question?
No, I think that was good. Both the grassroots and like I think the biggest thing is that people kind of fearful of technology or looking for like that end, like all the way through. But in some ways, you really kind of just need to think simply, like, do you need just a digital form online? Will that be a game changer? Is it a Google form? Whatever it is, but just thinking about that in micro increases and micro changes can make a big difference across different elections. So not to be overwhelmed.
No, I love just like doing the basics a little bit better every time and being able to see over time how that makes an impact. Somebody asked a question in here about recruitment and retention strategies for poll workers who speak other languages. I imagine in St. Louis County, that's something, given how many folks that you have to think about. I learned that Taunton, Massachusetts actually has a really big Portuguese population. So Mark or Lori, can you talk about that and what you do? Don't fight over it.
Yeah, it's in St. Louis County, that has not been, just given our population, our demographics, that has not been an issue for us in terms of other languages.
Same here, TJ. Even with the higher Portuguese population, we still only have ballots in English, and so we just haven't we haven't really run into that.
Excellent. All right.
I can
go
answer
ahead.
that from like a broader recruitment standpoint. I think one of the biggest things is, finding those people is, finding that community champion. So someone who is within that community, who has a high level of trust with that community, like reaching out to them and asking them like, hey, like, here's what we want to do. Here's how, here's what we're trying to achieve, and getting that partnership. So Lori mentioned strategic partnerships, and I think this is a perfect example of that. And then, in some states, there's now like mandates for like needing a certain amount of, bilingual staff members and employees. So there's a chance that could also happen. But I think to begin is finding that community champion that can help advocate for you to build that recruitment pipeline.
Excellent. Lori, I see a question in the Q&A which is asking, does anyone do a podcast? And I'm not sure if Eric Fay planted this question. I'll go ahead and send the link to High Turnout, Wide Margins.
All right. Yeah, our director does a podcast. Yeah, if you don't know, Eric Fay, our Democratic director, and his peer in Boone County, Missouri, have, I don't know, I think they've been doing it 3 or 4 years, have won awards and all kinds of things for their podcast. And it's all about hands-on, on the ground, talking to election, directors, and all kinds of folks across the country and even across the world about running elections. So that's our podcast glory.
That's funny. Well, we have about 5 minutes left. I do want to give everybody, as we do at the end of all of our webinars, 30 seconds, give your best, 30 seconds to a minute, give your best pitch on why being intentional about recruitment, being intentional about retention is so important to your operations. We'll start with Mark, go to Lori before ending with Lynn.
All right, on the spot. Thank you, TJ. I think being intentional about anything you do with recruiting and retention, it's really about team building and creating a culture. So, folks that are working for us at every level, whether it's in the office or our election workers out in the field, they're looking for, what kind of management style we have, what kind of culture we're going to have there. And I think it trickles right down to the voters' experience, right? So if we are creating a culture where we have a collaborative approach, we're part of a team, and we just have an overall just positive culture, and a patriotic culture too, because we're doing this because we love the United States. I think that you got to create outcomes, sort of what you're working towards. You know, we're working towards that positive outcome for our voters and our election workers. So just trying to get everyone involved on that and saying, you know, do I fit in here? Is this is where I want to be? And so that's really important to me. So that's what I have to say.
All right.
Great. Well, kind of building on that, our approach and my role here at the election board in St. Louis County is really about outcomes and results. So that's what we need to do. And we are big, so that we can't do everything. We have to be strategic. So we really try to have an innovative, continuous improvement mindset. And we do look at the whole system. So we want the training that poll workers go through to be quality. We want our workers to be quality. We want our outcomes to be positive. We've even looked at how would we measure that? How do we know that we've had a successful polling location on election day? So we're always looking at, how can we continuously improve, get the outcomes, what are the results, be able to articulate the results that we want, and have a kind of continuous loop of a good experience from recruitment all the way through election certification.
Well said, Mark and Lori. That was amazing. I agree with everything they say, second it. And I definitely kind of want to end with, this is one of the few government services in which you are very much bringing on onboarding like the general public. And this is a huge opportunity for you to turn any applicant into an advocate for your work, for the effective driving forward of elections and honoring everyone's right to vote. So I think that is a really important job. It's really, amazing, and just something to kind of consider, that every single person that comes through, even if it's someone who applies, who ends up not following up, like if you can make them an advocate for your work, like that's just going to make your election stronger.
Awesome. Thank you to Lynn, to Lori, and to Mark for joining us. And thank you to all of our guests or participants. I'm going to put the link to register for our next webinar in the chat. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and some of what it may mean for election officials and the work that they do. And that'll be on April 8th at noon Eastern. Again, thank you to everybody for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Talk to you later. Thank you.